Hey everybody, I am in Baltimore. I'm in front of the first Unitarian Church in Baltimore. It is the oldest Unitarian structure in North America, and it has a rich history. And I'm going to show you some things that no one else gets to see. Let's go.
My name is Catherine Evans, and I'm the church historian at First Unitarian Church of Baltimore.
All right.
We're in the middle of a busy city, as you can hear, with the traffic going by. The church was built in 1870, or from 1817 to 1818. Everything that you see on the outside is original. The fence is from 1820. These doors are facsimiles of doors at the Vatican. And the lamps on the outside are also original to the church. The outside of the structure hasn't changed at all. It's French neoclassical in design. The architect was Maximilien Godefroy. Unitarianism was established in the early 19th century in this country. It's a thought, a perspective, a religious perspective that's been around for hundreds of years. Unitarians believe in one God, and there are other details of it, but they believe essentially in that, and that there are many ways nothing should interfere with your relationship with the All-Powerful. So it's a very focuses on you as an individual and your growth toward what you feel that your spirituality is. What draws everybody together is that they're on the same path, and they're unified by 8 principles that Unitarians subscribe to. The 3 significant events in the church, which we just celebrated successively as bicentennial celebrations, were our founding on February 10th, 1817, the completion of this church and its dedication on October 29th, 1818, and the installation or the ordination of our first minister, Jared Sparks, in a service here on May 5th, 1819. This latter is of particular importance to Unitarians all over the country because the sermon that was preached that day was called Unitarian Christianity. It laid out the tenets of Unitarianism. At the time, Unitarianism wasn't a separate denomination. It was a kind of liberal, progressive religious thinking, but it was not separate from the Congregational Church in New England. And it was here that the minister at that service, at which Sparks was ordained, laid out the tenets of the faith in the sermon entitled as Unitarian Christianity. It is still an important document in our church. It's never referred to by that title. It's always referred to as the Baltimore Sermon because it was preached here. It led 6 years later to the foundation of the American Unitarian Association, which was our precursor organization. Well, this is the sanctuary inside. The presence in here now is that of the late 19th century, when the ceiling was added, a barrel vaulted ceiling that intersects the space between the floor level and the dome. It was originally completely open. The ceiling was introduced because of acoustic problems, and it's a pity. The dome is still up there. It's an incredibly interesting architectural space, but it's not used for anything. The adornments in here. There are 6 Tiffany windows on either side of the sanctuary, and the chancel was also greatly expanded in the late 19th century, and it includes original furniture. The pulpit on the right is the pulpit that Channing spoke from in the Baltimore sermon. The marble piece that looks like an altar isn't really an altar. It was the original base of the pulpit, and the chairs on either side and the sofa, those 3 pieces form a sedia that was designed by the architect Godefroy. So they're early 19th century pieces. The other furniture on the chancel is Tiffany, and it was added when the other changes. So those 2 chairs.
These 2 chairs.
And this, hard to call that a sofa, but it's the 2 combined there.
And these were made by Tiffany.
These are Tiffany.
So most people, when they hear Tiffany, think glass.
Right.
So they also made other pieces like furniture.
They did. A lot of people are familiar with the stained glass.
Mm-hmm.
We have the stained glass windows here, which are not figural. In other words, they're geometric shapes rather than figures. But they're Tiffany's.
And what I understand, these here are pretty much museum pieces.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Really
well,
historic.
actually, all of it is. The Tiffany's are
Yeah,
too.
it's awesome.
But the older set is from the beginning of the 19th
Now, is this the
century.
original color? This tan
No, I
here?
doubt it. The wood has been painted at some time in the past, probably in the middle 20th century. We know this because, for example, this pulpit, when as late as the year 2000, this pulpit was still painted beige, and it was lovingly restored by some expert craftsmen that are members of our church, and to its original appearance. The same thing goes for this lectern, which is the Universalist, we call a Universalist lectern. It was commissioned to commemorate the merger of our church with the Second Universalist Society of Baltimore, which happened in the middle of the 1930s. But that was beige too.
No, these pews, are they the original pews?
They are not. I'm not that familiar with the pew history and the whys and the wherefores of when they were changed. They've certainly been here a long time, but they're not original.
So when I came in here, I sat in about the 3rd pew, but originally when this church was built, not everyone was just able to just come sit down. These pews
Right.
were owned, if I understand?
That's right. The source of revenue for the operations of the church was through, it was true in this church, but it wasn't only true in this church. It was a common practice that pews were owned. So you bought them, and then you and your family or your friends, whoever you designated, could sit in them. There were some rows in the back that were free, and anybody who came in could sit in those. That practice evolved over time in the 19th century, but the notion of tithing wasn't there, and so there weren't. This was in lieu of that.
Some of the people who did own these, they were wealthy, and they often had servants. And a little later, you'll show me where those servants,
Right.
their designated space was.
When this church was built, it was really outside of the city. It was a rural setting there, and at the time, the businessmen and so forth often lived over their shops. As they accumulated wealth, they built homes that were farther out, but this is still not that far out. So there was a lot of complaint about, it's being so far away. It was very fortuitous that we chose this site. If it had been closer to the Jones Falls, we would have endured flooding throughout the 19th century. Many of those churches did not remain down there. And if it was any farther south, we might have been destroyed in the 1904 Baltimore fire. So it's lucky we were here, but the folks, the business people, would have taken carriages from their downtown home. And so, yeah, those are the servants.
Now, is this pew original?
The pulpit?
The pulpit, excuse me, the pulpit original
The pulpit is original.
May I stand in it?
Absolutely.
So from what I understand, this is, if
big
you're
honor.
invited to speak here, this is a special honor.
It's a big honor.
Yeah.
We commemorate the chanting sermon every year at a service that's close to May 5th. And an important thinker, whether they're a Unitarian minister elsewhere who's distinguished themselves in some way, or a social justice leader, are invited to speak from the pulpit to commemorate that occasion. And what we say to the people who are invited is that we wish them to challenge us for our era the way that Channing challenged the folks in his time.
So the goal is continuous growth.
Absolutely.
And understanding.
Absolutely.
Is this a unique feature of a Unitarian church?
It is. It's a good question. And this is not an old piece, but it is a very special piece. This, the base of it is the base of what was originally the baptismal font here. Your listeners may not be familiar with the fact that Unitarianism started out as a Christian denomination, and it evolved to become a Unitarian Christianity, and that process of evolution has continued. We merged with the Universalists and so forth, so we wouldn't wouldn't be called a Christian denomination now, although many people who are members are Christians. Anyway, this was a baptismal font. We have a great fortune of having an art restoration expert in our congregation, and he fashioned this to be our chalice. Now, the chalice has become over time the symbol of Unitarianism, and in fact, it's a double chalice for Unitarian Universalism now that the two have joined together. It is an image, it echoes the Holy Grail that's in the Tiffany mosaic up there. This is a very unusual piece of art to find in a Unitarian Universalist church, because its religious iconography is so pronouncedly Christian, of the late 19th century variety. But you see in front of the Christ figure there a chalice, which of course in that representation would be the Holy Grail.
So what I see is, Jesus and the 12 disciples, and they're all Caucasian, but this is a piece of its time.
It is, absolutely. It's a late 19th century work. It's the oldest purpose-built Unitarian church in North America, by which is meant that it was built by Unitarians for the purpose of being a Unitarian church, and has been continuously in the same congregation's hands since then. There are church buildings that are older, but they didn't start out being Unitarian churches. And then there are congregations that are older, but they didn't stay in their original places. Okay. So those are the distinguishing factors there. Some people are born and raised Unitarians, but those are a smaller percentage, really. Many people find their way to us over their own personal spiritual journeys, and they come out of all faith traditions, Judaism, fundamental Christianity,
Islam.
Catholicism, etc. Islam, exactly.
Interesting.
We have tried to convey the evolution of Unitarian Universalist thinking through the plaques that are below, and to indicate that we are reverencing all religious faith traditions. This particular piece is highly regarded and very valuable, and even though it's unusual, it's valued for the role that it has had in this church and its beauty, honestly. I wanted to show you this picture because this is the original interior of the sanctuary. So before the barrel vaulted ceiling, this is the lower edge of the dome, and there were 4 arches. These are called pendentives, and a very small chancel. This is the structure I showed, the base of which is the baptismal font that now has the chalice on it. And then this is the white Carrara marble with the pulpit on top of it.
Wow, that's beautiful. But the issue was sound. They changed it because
The
people,
acoustics were terrible.
so some people would come and not be able to hear very well.
Right.
So they had to adjust.
They lingered with that for, over 70 years, and it was very frustrating to all the ministers who were here. So they finally changed it. To me, it's an irony, because if they'd only waited a little longer, electronic amplification of voice would have been possible, and they wouldn't have needed to do this. The structure underneath the dome up there is really gorgeous, and there's a lot of yearning for that to be the same way. But this is nothing if not a accretion of history here, including that ceiling. So,
in the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore, you'll find numerous plaques, statues, and busts honoring significant figures in its rich history. Let's explore a few of them together. First, we have a plaque commemorating the 100th anniversary of the William Channing speech, a pivotal moment that encouraged the development of Unitarianism. This speech emphasized the rejection of the Trinity, the belief in human goodness, and the examination of theological ideas through the lens of reason. Next, we encounter a plaque honoring Jared Sparks, the first minister of the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore. Jared Sparks spent 4 years with the church before returning to Harvard University, where he pursued his training to become a Unitarian minister. Back then, Harvard University's Divinity School was the only institution for aspiring Unitarian ministers. In the 20th century, more options became available for ministerial training. Notably, Jared Sparks also wrote the very first biography of George Washington and eventually served as president of Harvard University. Moving on, we see a bust of Henry Payson, the founder of the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore. He was not only a councilman in Baltimore, but also a banker hailing from the Boston area. Many members of the church were New England businessmen, and they joined forces with Henry Payson to establish the First Church of Baltimore within his own home. Finally, on another note, the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore has had a long history of dedicated ministers. Here's a list of some of them, with the second half of the list displayed on the opposite side of the church.
the Angel of Truth is the sculpture that's on the pediment outside, and that was there from the beginning of the church. It was actually refashioned in the 1950s because it was terracotta and had degraded, so it needed to be replaced. But this is the original artist's model. It was in pieces, and it was restored. And we had a little fundraiser with having casts of this done. So they were made available for a price from the founder, or the company that made them. And this is to the one God. I have one of these in my home. This is the old one were pieces falling down, and a friend of mine collected the pieces and made this necklace for me to have. So that's a piece of the angel.
Oh, really?
It's still a little bit in storage mode because of the pandemic. But this is the Heritage Room. It's our archives, where our archives are housed. And I'm going to take the sheets off so you can see some of this stuff.
Okay.
This was originally the minister's office. Did you pull that one?
Sure.
Now, this is all original stuff here. These are the parish records of the First Independent Church, which is our original name, was First Independent Church, by Jared Sparks, our first minister. This is the original constitution of our church from February 10th, 1817. This is the members of the church who signed a document pledging the money to pay the salary of our first minister, Jared Sparks. This is Jared Sparks as a young man. Henry Payson, we regard as our founder, is at the top. Rembrandt Peale's signature is there. He founded the first museum in America here in Baltimore. He was a member, and so forth.
No, I'm looking at these numbers, these names, and this is the signing this to for, I guess, to fund the pay for the minister.
Right.
I see a lot of men's names. Were women included?
Yes, there is one woman's signatory that I will, right here, right? See the John something big, and right above that is S. Williams.
Yes.
That's Susanna Williams. Women have always been empowered in this church. They were not originally, the very beginning, they could be members, but they couldn't be on the elected leadership. But that was changed after time. So we've had a lot of women's leadership here. And in the 1990s, we called our first woman minister. So it's definitely been empowering for women. The portraits on the walls, that's when you're looking at is Reverend Ware, who was the minister in just after the end of the Civil War. And this is Amos Adams Williams, who was one of our founders. His granddaughter was the first church historian, and she's really the reason that we have a lot of the artifacts that we have. This is a portrait of William Ellery Channing, the Baltimore sermon. This is Enoch Pratt. These are early oil lamps that were used in the church. So this is the records from the absolute beginning of the church, 1817. These are...
And then I guess I was going to say they wrote everything, but they had no choice, huh?
That's
There's no computers.
That's right.
Wow.
Wow is right.
Wow, this is amazing.
And so I'm just imagining it was written out and then copied into this. But this was kept by the office of, it was called Register, and you can see why they were registering the information. But we would call that role as the secretary of the organization at that time. And I will flip back. I don't have this marked anyway, but this goes This where I've opened here is we're now in 1860, so we're on the threshold of the Civil War here, and this particular volume goes toward the end of the 19th century. This is a judge who was for a time chairman. This is 1865, would be election of who was on the board of trustees at that time.
This is amazing.
Isn't it?
It is.
I have to say, I think.
And you get to touch this sort of thing
it's
all
just
the time.
huge. Well, I try to limit it.
Sure. But I mean, the rest of us, this is something
absolutely. It's huge. And this is volume 1, 1892 we're up to. There's a second volume of this that continues this story. Here's Enoch Pratt's signature on the ordination of this minister right here.
Right there.
Yeah.
Wow. Enoch Pratt, a First Unitarian Church member, came to Baltimore in 1823 as a young entrepreneur from Massachusetts. He started a hardware business and achieved remarkable success. His legacy shines through the Enoch Pratt Free Library and Shepherd Pratt Health Hospital for Mental Health. Pratt inspired none other than Andrew Carnegie, a renowned national philanthropist who was his mentee.
So this is the parish hall, which is a separate building. It was given to the church in 1879 by Enoch Pratt, and it provided the church with meeting space and office space, neither of which it had. Mainly really just comprised, the original church only had the sanctuary and the catacombs below it and the gallery up above. And this just opened up the programming possibilities tremendously. One of the things that we treasure about our history is that this church has always been a place where people of all races could meet and gather. And there were certainly times in Baltimore where there were no other places like it about which it could be said. So this is certainly one of those rooms. The names on the above are people who were key figures in the 19th century. And with the exception of the floor here, which was done by professionals, all of the restoration work that you see was done by members of the church, including the painting, including those panels, including the names, including the chandeliers, all of it.
Right. So is this the entrance to the catacombs here?
It is.
Alrighty.
Yeah, believe it or not, the light switch is here.
Oh, wow. Oh, here we are. Wow. The catacombs cover the full footprint of the sanctuary and was the sole area for activity and storage beyond the sanctuary. Today, it functions as storage for archives, maintenance tools, supplies for social justice initiatives, and clothing for the homeless. Within these stone walls, the church's history is preserved, including exquisite stained glass dating back to the mid-19th century and other items awaiting repurposing. Speaking of repurposing, the bricks that now form the parish hall were salvaged from row homes demolished to construct the Enoch Pratt Central Library in the 19th century. In an era marked by urban poverty, the catacombs hosted 2 schools, one for girls and one for boys, teaching valuable skills such as housekeeping and carpentry. Though the gendered approach may raise eyebrows today, few religious institutions then offered such opportunities. As we explore, mysteries unfold. Some catacomb areas puzzle us with their unknown purpose, while others bear witness to events that, though speculative, could have profoundly affected the destinies of those seeking freedom from bondage.
I said that the dome of the church is supported by 4 massive columns, and that little door that you see there is a door into the column. So what I'm saying is that the column is actually a box that the inside of it is hollow. Mm-hmm. And those, you can see how thick the walls are there. That's one wall of the box. Now, this is extremely interesting space. There's no light in here except for what you have to provide there. But you see how, so you can imagine, because you can see how thick this wall is, that wow. These 3 are all that thick. Now, if you look upward, you see that it just keeps going on up and up and up. There are, embedded in the walls are metal rungs, which would enable someone to climb up inside. And there's a ledge up there with leather straps attached. And we would very much like to have expert guidance on determining whether it's possible that this space functioned as part of the Underground Railroad. If you think about it, we were in downtown Baltimore where there was transportation possibilities, mm-hmm. a hub, and this place is hidden, completely hidden, and you could go up there, and if with the leather straps you could strap yourself in so that you could even slumber up there temporarily. We don't know. We have no idea. This is speculation. But the external facts, the fact that this church was an abolitionist in orientation, and that its prominent members were, involved in supporting the union, it's plausible.
This wouldn't be something that they would go around talking about.
No, absolutely. They wouldn't have talked about it. It couldn't have talked about it at the time, nor would they have talked about it after the fact, mm-hmm. because, the war may have ended, mm-hmm. but opinions were still all over the map. As a citizen of the city, you would still have to function as mm-hmm. a business, and you'd be trading with whoever, and mm-hmm. so you needed, this sort of information would have been held very close to the chest. After, during Reconstruction, immediately after the Civil War ended, the minister of this church was involved in, as a leader, in setting up and organizing, and I always have to think about this long title, the Association for the Moral and Intellectual Development of Colored People. And what that organization did was found 200 schools in Maryland for the purpose of educating freedmen. Wow. Yeah. And that's immediately after...
For that time, that was revolutionary.
It was, and it gives you a sense of the philosophical, ethical point of view of the people who were here, how they behaved immediately afterwards. So this is why, thinking prior a few years, this doesn't seem like a stretch.
Sure.
Because this is really, this is an interesting view up this way. This is all, original.
So
interior.
this isn't often seen.
No.
So where are we now?
Well, you're about to see.
Okay.
Well, right now, this is our Action Central for our Zoom. This is really the Now, that's one of those original windows that hasn't been taken down. Not original, but older. And this is also, the part of the dome structure that you can see from here. You can see how curved it is. So this organ was built by Henry Niemann, Niemann. He was a German emigre, did his training in organ building in Germany and then came to this country. He's considered a premier organ builder. He was based here in Baltimore, and this is a Henry Niemann organ, a gift of Enoch Pratt to the church. It's been lovingly restored and maintained all these years, the last 50 of them by our current music director, James Houston, who's an expert on playing it and how it functions. Somebody's been going around closing everything up.
Welcome to the upstairs gallery. In its early days, the space was open, providing room for the church's servants, including coach drivers and others. However, the gallery's use changed when the organ was installed, leading to the enclosure we see today. While records are scarce regarding the specific servants or the working class individuals who attended, we do have extensive receipts documenting the labor that went into the constructing and maintaining the church. It's important to note that everyone involved in these efforts was compensated fairly, and slave labor was neither used nor considered by the church or its members. A notable aspect of the church's history is that most of its members came to Baltimore for business purposes. None of them held slaves. This reflects the church's commitment to principles of equality and fair labor practices. What a beautiful place with such rich history. I really appreciate you taking me around and showing me and my followers the church. I mean, a lot of this seems to be not necessarily common knowledge, and it's a privilege to learn it from you, such a knowledgeable person.
Well, thank you so much. It's a treat to be able to go and share it with someone. Honestly, we do regular tours twice a month, and we do special tours when groups come to town, which they do occasionally, just for seeing this special place. This is an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Every question that I had asked myself about this church has been gratifying to find the answer of, because it's all been enriching and inspiring. Who were these people? You know what? These people were leaders, and they were leaders of things that I think are important to care about now.